The biggest mistake you can make is to ignore the basics of your profession. This is true no matter what you do, where you live, or who you are. And I learned this lesson the hard way. Today, I'm going to show you why all strength, both physical and mental, comes from repetition, and why mastering the basics is the only path to true excellence. When you ignore the foundation of what makes you a good person, athlete, friend, entrepreneur, student, whatever it is you do, you will never be consistent. You'll have moments of brilliance followed by periods of mediocrity. You'll be up and down, hot and cold, sometimes great, sometimes terrible. And you'll never understand why. That's the biggest lesson I've learned from studying athletes. And trust me, I've studied a lot of them. Because people who play professional sports are under constant pressure to perform. They can't fake it. They can't hide behind excuses. They either perform or they don't. The results are clear, win or lose, victory or defeat. It's right there for everyone to see. Take Daniel Cormier, for example. He's the current UFC light heavyweight champion and a former Olympic wrestler. The 38-year-old champion has an impressive career. He won multiple gold medals as a wrestler. And in MMA, he has won 20 of his 22 fights in total. Only 2 losses in his entire career. He's considered as one of the best fighters in the world, one of the greatest of all time in his division. On top of that, he's also a combat sports analyst and co-host of a major sports show. The man is highly active. He's competing at the highest level. He's analyzing fights. He's teaching. He's constantly in the public eye. So what is his key to success, according to himself? You might think it's his athletic ability, or his toughness, or his fight IQ. But no, focusing on the basics, he says, you don't get to the highest levels of the sport without having the basics in order. Let that sink in. One of the greatest fighters in the world, someone who competes against the best athletes on the planet, attributes his success to the basics, not advanced techniques, not secret training methods, not special genetics, the basics. That's not only true for sports. It's also true for everything else in life. Writing, speaking, selling, leading, parenting, teaching, you name it. Without having the basics in order, you'll never achieve your full potential. You might have some success. You might have a few wins, but you'll never reach the top. You'll never achieve mastery. You'll never become truly great at what you do. And here's why. The basics are called basics for a reason. They're the foundation. Everything else is built on top of them. If your foundation is weak, if your basics are shaky, everything you build on top will be unstable. It doesn't matter how fancy your techniques are. It doesn't matter how many advanced strategies you know. If you don't have the basics down, you'll crumble when pressure hits. Repeat the basics. And there's only one way to improve the basics. By repetition. You get stronger by lifting weights, rep after rep. You don't lift a weight once and become strong. You lift it hundreds of times, thousands of times, over and over until your muscles adapt and grow. You build stamina by performing anaerobic exercise. You don't run once and develop endurance. You run again and again. Your cardiovascular system adapts. Your muscles learn to use oxygen more efficiently. Your body becomes a machine. We all know that. Nobody questions that physical strength comes from repetition. But how about your mind? How do you become mentally stronger? And why does it even matter? The answer is simple. Everything starts with the mind. Your body can be strong, but if your mind is weak, you won't achieve anything. Your skills can be sharp, but if your mind isn't disciplined, you won't execute. Your knowledge can be vast, but if your mind isn't focused, you won't apply it. There was an author named Steven Pressfield who wrote a book called The War of Art. He said it best, long term, we must begin to build our internal strengths. It isn't just skills like computer technology. It's the old-fashioned basics of self-reliance, self-motivation, self-reinforcement, self-discipline, self-command. Read that again. The old-fashioned basics, self-reliance, self-motivation, self-reinforcement, self-discipline, self-command. These are the fundamentals of mental strength. But my challenge was always this. How do you do that? I know how to get physically stronger. Go to the gym, lift weights, do cardio, eat protein, sleep well. The formula is clear, but I never knew how I could get mentally stronger. How do you exercise your mind? How do you build mental muscle? How do you develop discipline and self-command? And whenever people told me it's all about life experience, I always thought there was a better way. Let's be honest. Who wants to wait until they are 70 to get mentally strong? Who wants to spend decades making mistakes and learning lessons the hard way? Some things can be done faster, especially if you keep repeating the basics, because that's when we screw up most of the time. We think we know everything. We think we've moved past the basics. We think we're too advanced for fundamentals, and that's exactly when we start to decline. Stay a beginner. How often do you think to yourself, I already know that? Be honest. If you're like most of us, quite often, maybe even multiple times a day. Someone gives you advice and you think, I already know that. You read something and you think, I've heard this before. You attend a training and you think, this is basic stuff I learned years ago. The one thing we have to remind ourselves is that the people who think they know everything are the biggest losers in life. Harsh but true. I meet people all the time who think they know everything. And I don't even mention people on the internet. A lot of commenters always want to show how smart they are and that everything is so obvious. This is common sense. Everyone knows this. Nothing new here. They're so busy trying to prove they already know everything that they never actually learn anything. Well, that's not how the greatest people in the world approach things. The truly great ones stay humble. They stay curious. They stay open to learning. Muhammad Ali once said, it's the repetition of affirmations that leads to belief. And once that belief becomes a deep conviction, things begin to happen. When you repeat the basics, you don't only become great, you will stay great. And that's the harder part. Becoming great is one thing. Staying great is another. It's a challenge that all high performers face. How do you maintain excellence? How do you avoid decline? How do you prevent yourself from getting complacent? The answer is repetition. I repeat the basics of many things in my life. Fitness, philosophy, kindness, business, writing. I don't just learn them once and move on. I come back to them again and again. For example, I read my favorite books on Stoicism every month to exercise my mind. The same books, over and over. Am I learning new information? Not really. But I'm deepening my understanding. I'm reinforcing the principles. I'm reminding myself of what matters. I regularly grab a classic book on writing to repeat the basics of simple and effective writing. I know the principles. I've read it before, but I read it again because repetition is how we internalize. Repetition is how we master. If I don't repeat these things, I simply forget about my philosophy for life or how to write good articles. That's how our brain works. Without repetition, we forget things easily. You might learn something once and think you know it. But a week later, a month later, a year later, it's gone. Your brain has pruned that information. It decided it wasn't important because you never used it again. But when you repeat something, when you come back to it over and over, your brain says, this must be important. This person keeps reviewing this. I better make this permanent. And that's when real learning happens. That's when knowledge becomes wisdom. That's when understanding becomes mastery. I always look at myself as a beginner. That's one of the first and most important lessons I learned from my mentor. He's now in his 70s and still considers himself as a student of life. Think about that. 70 years old, decades of experience, massive success, and he still sees himself as a student, not a master, not an expert, a student, always learning, always growing, always improving. I have the same approach to business. I always go back to the question of what is the purpose of a business? I can tell you that if you answer to make money, you need to repeat the basics because that's not the purpose of a business. The purpose of a business is to create value for customers, to solve problems, to make people's lives better. Money is a byproduct of doing that well. But if you forget the basics, if you start thinking business is just about making money, you lose your way. It's very simple. Figure out what the basics are in your field and repeat them. Keep it simple. That's the formula. But there's a warning here. There's no bigger waste of time than repeating bad, wrong, or negative things. That's the only thing you should be mindful of. You can practice something 1,000,000 times, but if you're practicing the wrong technique, you're just ingraining bad habits. You can repeat affirmations all day, but if they're negative affirmations, you're making yourself weaker, not stronger. You can study constantly, but if you're learning from the wrong sources, you're filling your mind with garbage. So be careful about what you repeat. Don't take advice from people who haven't successfully done something themselves. Don't learn from people who are theoretical experts, but have never achieved real results. Don't study people who talk a good game, but don't walk the walk. Find people who have actually done what you want to do. Find people who have achieved the results you want to achieve. Find people who embody the principles you want to embody. And then study them, learn from them, repeat what they did, practice what they practiced, master what they mastered, be great, stay great. Look, you can be very smart, driven, humble, all of those things. But if you don't stay that way, what's it all worth? I see this all the time. How often do you see people become successful only to squander their success? They get a big win. They achieve something impressive. They reach a level they've always dreamed of. And then what happens? They stop doing the things that made them successful. They stop practicing the basics. They start thinking they've figured it out. They start believing their own hype. They get complacent. And slowly, inevitably, they decline. How many hit wonders have you seen? Exactly, tons of them. Musicians who have one massive song and then disappear. Entrepreneurs who have one successful business and then fail at everything else. Athletes who have one great season and then fade into mediocrity. Writers who publish one best-selling book and never write anything good again. Why does this happen? Because they didn't understand that repetition is what made them great in the first place. They thought it was talent. They thought it was luck. They thought it was timing. And maybe those things played a role. But the real reason was repetition. They practiced. They worked. They repeated the basics until they achieved mastery. And then they stopped. They thought they had arrived. They thought they could coast. They forgot that staying great requires the same effort as becoming great. Only the great ones are here to stay. And if you want to stay here too, you must never underestimate the power of repetition. Never think you've made it or that you're smart enough, because that mindset is what keeps you great. Wait, that sounds backwards, doesn't it? Let me clarify. The mindset of never thinking you've made it, never thinking you're smart enough, never thinking you can stop learning and practicing, that mindset is what keeps you great. Because when you stay humble, when you stay hungry, when you stay committed to the basics, you never stop improving. You never plateau. You never decline. You just keep getting better, day after day, week after week, year after year. Let me give you some practical examples of how to apply this in different areas of your life. In business, the basics are simple. Provide value, solve problems, take care of customers, manage cash flow, hire good people, communicate clearly. These are not complicated concepts. But how many businesses fail because they forget these basics? They get distracted by growth hacks and marketing tricks and fancy strategies. They forget that the basics are what builds sustainable success. In writing, the basics are simple. Write clearly, use simple words, keep sentences short, show, don't tell, edit ruthlessly. Read good books, practice daily. Again, not complicated. But how many writers struggle because they're trying to sound smart instead of being clear? They're using fancy vocabulary instead of simple language. They're writing long, complicated sentences instead of short, punchy ones. They've forgotten the basics. In fitness, the basics are simple. Lift heavy things, do cardio, eat real food, get enough protein, sleep well, be consistent. That's it. But how many people are jumping from program to program, diet to diet, looking for the magic solution? They've forgotten that the basics, repeated consistently over time, are what create results. In relationships, the basics are simple. Communicate honestly. Listen actively. Show appreciation. Spend quality time. Keep your commitments. Be kind. Again, simple but not easy. And how many relationships fall apart because people forget these basics? They get comfortable. They stop trying. They stop doing the things that built the relationship in the first place. In learning, the basics are simple. Pay attention. Take notes. Review regularly. Practice actively. Ask questions. Teach others. These are the fundamentals of effective learning. But how many students struggle because they're looking for shortcuts? They want to cram. They want to memorize without understanding. They want results without repetition. Do you see the pattern? In every field, in every area of life, the basics are relatively simple. The challenge is not in understanding them. The challenge is in repeating them consistently, over and over. Even when it's boring, even when it's not exciting, even when you think you already know it. That's where most people fail. They understand the basics. They just don't practice them. They know what they should do. They just don't do it. They're always looking for the next shiny thing, the next advanced technique, the next secret strategy. And they never master the fundamentals. Let me tell you how I apply this principle in my own life. Every morning, I review my core principles, not because I don't know them, but because repetition keeps them alive in my mind. Every week, I practice the basics of my craft, writing, business, communication, not because I've forgotten how, but because repetition keeps me sharp. Every month I read books I've already read, not because I need new information, but because repetition deepens understanding. Every year I reflect on whether I'm still practicing the basics, not because I doubt myself, but because repetition prevents complacency. This might sound boring to some people. You do the same things over and over. Yes, absolutely. Because champions aren't built on variety, they're built on repetition. Masters aren't created by constantly trying new things. They're created by repeating the right things until they become second nature. Now let me address a common objection. But doesn't repetition get boring? Yes, sometimes it does. Practicing the basics can be monotonous. Reviewing the fundamentals can feel tedious. Repeating what you already know can seem pointless. But here's what I've learned. Boredom is often a sign that you're doing something important. The things that are most valuable are rarely the most exciting. Brushing your teeth is boring, but it prevents cavities. Budgeting is boring, but it builds wealth. Practicing scales is boring, but it builds musical skill. Reviewing fundamentals is boring, but it builds mastery. So when you feel bored practicing the basics, remember that boredom might be the price of excellence. It might be the cost of greatness. It might be what separates you from everyone else who gives up because they're chasing excitement instead of results. Let me give you another perspective on this. Think about your favorite musician. When they perform a song you love, it sounds effortless, natural, easy, like they were born playing that way. But here's what you don't see. They've played that song hundreds of times, maybe thousands. They've practiced those chord progressions until their fingers know exactly where to go without thinking. They've repeated those vocal runs until they can hit every note perfectly. What looks like natural talent is actually the result of endless repetition. The same is true for any expert in any field. Think about a professional speaker. They walk on stage and deliver a presentation that seems spontaneous and natural. But they've given that talk dozens of times. They've practiced their stories. They've refined their timing. They've repeated their key points until they can deliver them in their sleep. Think about a master chef. They can cook a dish quickly and effortlessly, but they've prepared that dish hundreds of times. They've repeated the techniques until they're automatic. They've practiced the fundamentals until they don't have to think about them. That's what repetition does. It takes what's difficult and makes it easy. It takes what's conscious and makes it unconscious. It takes what's deliberate and makes it automatic. And that's when real mastery happens. When you've repeated something so many times that you don't have to think about it, you can focus on the nuances. You can focus on the artistry. You can focus on innovation. But you can't get there without first repeating the basics until they're second nature. Let me give you a framework for implementing this in your life. First, identify the basics in your field. What are the fundamental skills? What are the core principles? What are the foundational practices? Make a list. Be specific. Don't say business. Say cash flow management, customer service, product development. Don't say writing. Say clear sentences, active voice, strong verbs, editing. Get granular. Second, schedule regular practice of these basics, daily if possible. Weekly at minimum. Put it on your calendar. Treat it like an important appointment, because it is. This is how you build and maintain mastery. Third, track your practice. Keep a log. Note what you practiced and when. This creates accountability and helps you see your progress over time. Fourth, review and reflect regularly. Are you still practicing the basics? Have you drifted away from fundamentals? Are there basics you've been neglecting? Honest assessment is crucial. Fifth, find ways to make practice engaging. Maybe you practice with a partner. Maybe you set challenges for yourself. Maybe you track metrics. Find ways to stay motivated even when repetition feels boring. Sixth, teach the basics to others. Teaching is one of the best ways to deepen your own understanding. When you have to explain fundamentals to someone else, you master them more thoroughly. Seventh, never graduate from the basics. This is key. No matter how advanced you become, always come back to fundamentals. Always practice the basics. Always review the core principles. The moment you think you're too advanced for basics is the moment you start to decline. Now, I want to address something important. This doesn't mean you never learn new things. It doesn't mean you never try advanced techniques. It doesn't mean you never innovate or experiment. Of course, you do those things, but you do them on top of a solid foundation of basics. You build new skills on top of mastered fundamentals. You innovate after you've internalized the core principles. Think of it like building a house. You can add stories, expand rooms, create interesting architecture, but all of that sits on a foundation. If you neglect the foundation while building fancy additions, the whole structure will eventually collapse. The same is true for your skills and knowledge. So let me challenge you right now. What are the basics in your field, and when was the last time you practiced them? Not learn something new, not tried an advanced technique, but practice the fundamental skills that everything else is built on. If you can't answer that question, or if the answer is, it's been a while, that's your sign. It's time to get back to basics. It's time to remember that all strength comes from repetition. It's time to embrace the power of practicing fundamentals. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not exciting. I know it's not as fun as learning the latest trend or trying the newest strategy. But I promise you this, if you commit to repeating the basics in your field, if you practice the fundamentals consistently over time, you will become great. And more importantly, you will stay great. You won't be a one-hit wonder. You won't have a flash of success followed by decline. You'll build lasting excellence, sustainable mastery, enduring greatness. Because you understood something that most people never figure out. All strength comes from repetition. If this video helped you, drop a comment below. What are the basics in your field? And what's one fundamental skill you're committing to practice more consistently? I read every comment and I want to hear what you're working on. And if you want more content about building mastery and achieving lasting success, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Next week, I'm breaking down the specific daily habits of high performers and how you can implement them in your own life. Because success isn't about one big breakthrough. It's about small actions repeated consistently over time. You've got this. Stop chasing advanced techniques. Master the basics through repetition. Be great. Stay great. I'll see you in the next one.